So I'd like to now pass the reins to the current president of our board, Lyle Clark.
Thank you very much, John, and welcome everybody to the 90th Ontario Nature Annual General Meeting. My name is Lyle Clark, and this is the second time as president that I have led a Zoom-based annual general meeting. As rewarding as my tenure as president has been, my greatest regret is that COVID has prevented me from getting together with all of you more often at the annual general meetings, various regional opportunities, but I will be continuing sorry, I had my video off. I will be continuing my participation as past president, and I look forward to meeting you all and us all getting together at next year's annual general meeting and other opportunities going forward. So before we begin, I would like to begin today's meeting with a land acknowledgement. I'd like to acknowledge specifically that Ontario Nature's head office is situated in Toronto on land that is within the traditional territory of the Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Anishinaabe nations, the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nation. This territory was the subject of the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement between the Iroquois Confederacy and the Ojibwe and allied nations to peaceably share and care for the resources around the Great Lakes. This territory is also covered by the Toronto Purchase. Today, Toronto is home to many Indigenous people from across Turtle Island. We acknowledge our treaty relationship and responsibilities to both the land and to these original peoples. And with that, I would like to begin our annual general meeting with you joining me in viewing a slideshow on Ontario Nature's 90th anniversary. Well, thank you very much for that. It's Lyle Clark back here again. It never ceases to amaze me how much Ontario Nature has accomplished over the years and how much we can accomplish by working together and solving the challenges we continue to face going forward. Something that every member of Ontario Nature can be proud to have been part of such a tremendous body of achievement. So thank you all very much for that. Yes, thank you, Gabby. It's always the best part of the meeting. I'm always learn new stuff. I'm right in the process of planting native plants in my on my property, so some nice hints there for me to plant. So appreciate that very much. And with that, we will look at beginning formally, and I'll call to order the 90th Annual General Meeting of Ontario Nature. Being a Zoom meeting, I thought it would be helpful if we talked a little bit about the protocols for voting. So two things. One, you must be a member to vote. So if you would like to vote, please, and you are a member, please access through the Zoom line as opposed to phoning in, sorry. Secondly, family memberships are entitled to 2 votes. So if you would like to make 2 votes, then you can log in under 2 separate devices and both of those votes will be counted. The process will be like this. The presenter will read the motion and ask for a mover and a seconder. Those of you who would like to move and second, please do so in the chat. And John will record the names that will be recorded as firster or motioner and seconder. Secondly, once that mover and seconder has been named, then the presenter will ask for comments and questions and provide you with a minute or so to type comments or questions into the chat, into the Q&A box, not the chat line. We're going to use the chat line for motions and seconds and the Q&A for comments and questions. If you have a long question to type, you probably want to do it in 2 legs. So just put in that you're typing a question and submit that, and then we will wait to make sure we have seen your question or your comment before we move on. So I hope that's clear. The presenter will, once all the questions are done and comments are made, then we'll ask for a vote, and the members will have about 45 seconds to vote, and the results will be displayed and announced once the motion is carried or not. So with that, you've received the minutes of the 89th Ontario Nature AGM in your package. I would like to make a motion that the minutes of the 89th Annual General Meeting held November 14th, 2020 by Zoom be accepted as circulated. Can I have a mover and a seconder for that, please?
So moved by Chris Evans and seconded by Barbara Canton.
Thanks to both of you. Can we just take a few minutes now to see if there are any questions or comments to be made?
So just as a reminder, you can put any questions or discussion in the Q&A feature. I don't see anything just yet, Lyle.
No. We'll just give it a little bit more. I think we said 45 seconds we would give. Oh, sorry, a minute for questions, 45 seconds for the vote.
Sorry, I think I was mistaken on who moved it. So Chris was making a separate statement. So just while we're going, could somebody please move the motion? And that would be through the chat. Okay, so Jacob Mueller moves. Thanks for that correction.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that gives us a minute. There are no questions or comments in the chat or in the Q&A, sorry. So with that, I will call for the vote, John.
Okay, let's give it another, say 15 seconds.
Terrific. Thank you very much. 97% in favor. There were 3 abstentions, and I declare the motion therefore carried. Thank you all for that. And for the next item on the agenda, I would like to ask our Executive Director, Caroline Schultz, to provide us with an overview of last year in review. And without stealing her thunder, I will say it was absolutely a remarkable year of accomplishment under difficult circumstances. So, Caroline, thank you for presenting that to us. Well, yeah.
Thank you, Lyle. We have to smooth our transitions, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I'm so delighted, actually, when I look at the long list of everyone who has joined this second virtual AGM, how many names to recognize, and I feel a little bit sad that I haven't been able to see very many of you over the past year. I just wanted to really start off by acknowledging that it's been a tough, well, an extraordinary and tough year for everyone, really, in one way or another. And for Ontario Nature, you know, our whole way of working changed, I think, as you heard in our last AGM, because it was held so late, thanks to the pandemic. It was in November last year. But a few things that we had planned for the year had to be delayed, or in some cases canceled, like our annual gathering last year, but we did have to delay a number of things. So we're going to be doing, I think, a lot of catch up this current year with a few projects, those that involve actually meeting in person, gathering for events, volunteer events, that kind of thing. But we did have, I think, a pretty extraordinary year despite all of that. So what I'd like to do is take you through the highlights of the year, just a few of the highlights. Obviously, it's not very easy to give a short presentation on everything that's happened, but I'd like to really share with you some of the key things. So if I could get the next slide. Yes, so I'd like to start off with our work on protected areas, or our protected places campaign. As many of you will know, there was an international and a Canadian commitment to achieve 17% protected areas by 2020. We, Ontario Nature, has been working on this campaign for a number of years now. And unfortunately for Ontario, some provinces did, actually a couple of provinces did quite well, like Quebec. They actually achieved their 17%, but Ontario Nature is really, Ontario, the province of Ontario is stuck at just over 10%. But I want to share with you some of the sort of highlights of things we've been working on and our aspirations going forward, because all of what we've been doing is a major foundation for ultimately Ontario getting to where it needs to be. Next slide, please. I don't have control of the slides, so forgive me for saying next slide, please. So we did share with you some of the work that we've been doing in, over a number of years to look at protected areas that have been identified within FSC certified land. So these are forest companies that are certified through the Forest Stewardship Council certification process. And as part of that protected areas to be certified, a company needs to identify areas that are withdrawn from logging and set aside as what they call candidate protected areas. And in Ontario, there are over 1 million hectares of these protected areas on FSC certified land. So this is a massive opportunity, which has certainly been something we've been working on and on our radar for a long time. But this year we completed, I should say, Julie Bowen, working with Birds Canada, who's our boreal program manager, worked with Birds Canada to produce a new report on this opportunity for protected areas on FSC land, and looked at all of those set aside areas to determine if they were intact, what sort of quality they are for conservation purposes. And if I could see the next slide, please. And this is the map from the report that actually shows the potential protected areas that could be added to our existing protected area systems. So in the bright yellow, those are all the areas that have been identified by the Forest Stewardship Council certified companies, and the green areas are existing protected areas. So you can see they will, if we can push them to become fully protected and have them count towards international protected areas targets, they will make a major contribution. And as you can see, they're primarily in the north because that's where most of the forest operations take place. Next, please. Another thing that we've been working on for a long time is identifying the most important areas for protection in the province that are currently unprotected. And there are actually numerous opportunities for protection. And we published on our website something called a story map, which highlights the key areas that represent these opportunities, including the Forest Stewardship Council sites. And you can see the red sites on the map. Those are the FSC sites. And then since we did our first story map, we teamed up with a number of partners to launch a sort of story map version 2, and this one is open to people to actually submit areas that they think are critically important for protection. And the whole idea of this is to really have it's sort of like crowdsourcing information on areas that our government should be considering for protected areas. Most of these areas are on public land. There are a couple that are on private land related to ownership by certain industries, but for the most part, they're not on private land. And if you look up in the northwest, there are a couple of key areas that are with the territories of First Nations in the area who are pushing for protection or to exclude industrial resource extraction, Grassy Narrows and KI communities in the far north. And if I could have the next slide, please. So if you actually go onto the story map and click on any one of these areas, you will get a little summary of what the area is, what makes it important, and who has actually submitted the area for consideration for protection. So in this one, the example is Wolf Lake, which is just northeast of Sudbury, the world's largest old growth red pine stand anywhere in the world. It's absolutely extraordinary, but currently is not protected, though it should be. Next slide, please. That's just to get a sort of sense of Lake. It's not actually Wolf Lake, it's a portage into Wolf Lake, which I had the pleasure of enjoying a few years ago. Next slide. So another thing that we've been working on is with a number of partners around the sort of GTA, Greater Golden Horseshoe area. It's something called the Southern Ontario Nature Coalition. It was convened by the Greenbelt Foundation, bringing together key conservation organizations and also Cambium Indigenous Professional Services, which is an Indigenous environmental consulting firm, to look at how in a sort of near urban area, we can actually conserve biodiversity, have a positive impact on climate change, both in terms of mitigation, but also adaptation to climate change, all related to protecting and stewarding natural ecosystems. So you can see we were joined by a large number of partners in this initiative. Next slide, please. And there is a final report, which you can find on the Greenbelt Foundation's website and download there. I believe it's on our website as well, Ontario Nature's website. And this is a map that sort of represents the opportunities that exist for protecting cores and corridors of natural habitat within the Greater Golden Horseshoe area. So some of this relates to protecting what exists in terms of natural areas. There also is potential for restoration to actually help enhance connections along the landscape. So there, Ontario Nature specifically worked on a lot of GIS analysis to look at the natural connections across the landscape, you know, areas where there are connections that we want to protect in terms of natural habitat, and areas that we might want to promote restoration and to actually increase connectivity. And then the other arrows, the big arrows, represent connections to other sort of major natural heritage systems. So really, how do we get a landscape of connected cores and corridors right across Southern Ontario, but ensuring that near urban nature is a part of that picture, and we're not moving, as we have been, towards completely developing near urban areas and sort of leaving conservation to, you know, the further afield, even though that too is a challenge because of development that's expanding way beyond, in this particular region, way beyond the Greater Golden Horseshoe. Next slide, please. And another thing on the protected areas front that we were involved with, we conducted an assessment of municipal lands to determine if they met the criteria, or if they meet the criteria for being counted towards the 17% target of protected, and it's protected and other effective conservation measures. So other areas that contribute to biodiversity conservation and meet particular thresholds to count as contributing to the international targets. So we did assessments of lands in Toronto, Ajax, Northumberland, Simcoe, and Lambton, and we can't share the results of that, but what I can say, because of the sort of proprietary nature and the sort of negotiations that continue, but what I can say is that we did determine a number of areas that are on municipal lands that actually are eligible to be counted towards the national and the international targets. Next slide, please. And then the other thing too is that we now have the new commitments from our federal government to protecting 25% of Canada's lands and waters by 2025. And then that is also with a view to protecting 30% by 2030. So our targets have become more ambitious, and Canada is one of about 50 countries that have signed on to these ambitious targets. So all of that is to say that in Ontario, at just over 10%, we have a long way to go. Recently, our provincial government indicated that they do want to establish more protected areas, but they haven't indicated any sort of specific targets, and they've convened an advisory group or a working group to provide them with a report on opportunities. And we've been quite active in informing this advisory group of the opportunities that exist, such as the Forest Stewardship Council opportunities that exist in Northern Ontario. One of the things that I would like to say at this point is that our work towards protecting lands and waters as Ontario Nature, it's crucial, and we have been working with a number of Indigenous communities and First Nations towards a sort of shared vision and approach towards establishing protected areas. So Indigenous protected and conserved areas are a particular sort of category of protected area that we're very keen to see actually happen in Ontario. And we're, I think, cautiously optimistic that you know, going forward, we will have the space to actually be in a position to help and aid and work with our Indigenous partners to actually achieve their vision for what might be Indigenous protected and conserved areas. We have in Canada and in Ontario, we have a very unfortunate legacy with conservation and protected areas, in particular with our First Nations peoples. It's been a form of conservation colonialism where, you know, some of, or many of our parks, if not most of our parks that have been established in this province have been done at the expense of our first peoples who have been dispossessed and not allowed to continue their lives and their traditional practices on their traditional territories within which some of these protected areas or parks lie. So we're hoping for a completely new approach to protected areas where we truly honor and respect and work with and collaborate with Ontario's Indigenous peoples to actually achieve the kind of conservation that works for biodiversity and works for our First Peoples. And our job is to, I think, for Ontario Nature, is to try to do that as best we can and as respectfully as we can. Next slide, please. And then I'd just like to close off talking about protected areas with this quote from Rick Beaver, who is Mississauga elder from Alderville First Nation. And we've used this quote before. He said this at one of our gatherings, Indigenous gatherings, a few years ago. But I think it's so important, and I think for us at Ontario Nature, and I hope for you who are participating, you can hold this close to your hearts, because it really says it all in a beautiful way. So I'd like to move on to our community science work. We've actually changed the use of the term citizen science because it isn't as inclusive as it ought to be. So we, along with really most other organizations that are involved with volunteer data collection, which was previously called citizen science, have moved to community science, which I think says much better what it is that this work is about. Next slide, please. So the Reptile Amphibian Atlas, you've heard a lot about for a number of years. Finally, the publication is going to be completed this year, but I just wanted to highlight that since the atlas began in 2009, 250,000 records have been collected since then. And the atlas also involved gathering a huge number of records that already existed. So the total number was over 480,000 records. And there were over 12,000 participants in the atlas since it began, and over 200 organizations. So stay tuned. The atlas will be published. It will be a digital atlas. It'll be published online. And we do have a number of key volunteers that are involved with the publication, writing various sections, etc. So it's a bit of a slow process, unfortunately, but it will be available soon. Next slide, please. And if you're interested, there is a summary of the Reptile Amphibian Atlas that's available on our website, which gives a little bit of the history in terms of the numbers of records and so on. So please visit our website and take a look at that. Next slide, please. And I'm very thrilled to announce, and probably a little bit daunted, at least I'm not daunted. I think the key people like Mike Cadman, who are running the third Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas, it's just was launched at the beginning of January of this year. This is, as you know by the name, the third Ontario Breeding Bird Atlas. It's the third iteration. So I can't really believe that it's that time again in some ways. When I first came to Ontario Nature as executive director, the second Breeding Bird Atlas was just being published. But this is the first official field season, so 5 years of data collection prior to all of the analysis and publication. And I know many of you are birders, and I'm sure many of you have already signed up for your Atlas Squares. If I could have the next slide. And as before, the Atlas is a partnership of a number of organizations, Birds Canada, the Ontario Field Ornithologists, Ontario Nature, and also in partnership with Environment and Climate Change Canada. And information about the Atlas can be found at the Birds Ontario website, and that's the website address if anybody wants to find out more about the whole process. And I'm sure even if you don't have an Atlas Square, but you know somebody who does, it's great to go out and actually assist somebody who has a square to contribute data to the Atlas. Next slide, please. Our snake monitoring work is continuing. I think some of you may know that we developed a long-term snake monitoring protocol, which is being increasingly implemented by partners. So this year we had 8 partners implementing the long-term snake monitoring protocol, ranging from Parks Canada to our stewards on Ontario Nature's own nature reserves. So the work continues, and the uptake in terms of those using the protocol continues, so that we've got a much better system for recording information on snakes, so that we can understand best what's happening with their populations, and of course that informs conservation action. Next slide, please. And also we've been working on ginseng conservation for a few years now, and this is continuing with much more intensive research which will be ongoing for the next 2 years at least. We have created American ginseng restoration guidelines that are being reviewed by the experts. So those will be available shortly. And like the snake monitoring protocol, the idea is then that becomes the standard for land managers and volunteers, landowners like land trusts, etc., to implement those guidelines or for restoration of ginseng populations. We also have monitoring protocols as well. And we also conducted monitoring training for Canadian Wildlife Service staff. Some of our community science work was a little impacted by the whole COVID pandemic because of workshops and training involve in-person gatherings and meetings. But last year, as the summer progressed, we did find ways to do some of that work safely. It's a little bit more difficult, but it was able to go ahead. Next slide, please. So our nature reserves, we've been quite busy on a number of our nature reserves, and I'll just give you some highlights. Next slide, please. Our Gananoque Lake Nature Reserve, which we acquired at the end of 2019. So last year was meant to be a big year for doing species inventory, all sorts of baseline work, ecological land classification work, etc. We had planned a big public BioBlitz for, involving members and others. We did end up actually having an experts BioBlitz where people who are experts in certain taxa actually came to the reserve, so that it wasn't a gathering. Individuals went to the reserve and gathered data themselves. And people like our board member, James Kamstra, went to the reserve where he found, I think it was 3 or 4 breeding territories for cerulean warbler. So a lot of work was done at the reserve to gather that information. And actually we've Gabby, who's in the photograph, who is also your quiz host, has just returned from the nature reserve this year, and there was another BioBlitz to gather even more data. Unfortunately, again, it was meant to be one that involved members, but because of the COVID lockdown restrictions, we had to defer that. So such is life. Next slide, please.
Caroline, sorry to interject a little bit here. It's a pretty good flow, but you are getting a little choppy. Could you turn your video off?
Turn it off?
Yes, please.
Oh, right. Yeah. Okay. You can't see me, but I'll keep talking. And hopefully that makes a difference. So we continued our post-burn monitoring at Stone Road Alvar, where we did a prescribed burn. And so our staff and other volunteers were able to get out to Stone Road Alvar last year. Next slide, please. And the Cawthra-Mulock Nature Reserve Accessible Trail was officially opened. I did feature it last year in my presentation at the AGM, but we did have an official opening. And as you can see, it was a socially distanced opening in the fall. And our trail builder, Zane Davis, who is there in the red vest, he described a lot about the whole sort of process for building the accessible trails. So I think that was really interesting. And we also redeveloped the entire trail system on the reserve. So created some new trails, closed off some trails, and improved trails. The Sydenham River, oh, next slide, please. The Sydenham River Nature Reserve was also a major feature of work that we did last year. Next slide, please. Next slide. Oh, so as part of an ongoing restoration effort. The Sydenham River Nature Reserve has some farm fields, and the goal is to restore these to native Carolinian habitat, some prairie, meadow, and forest. And we have been active with amazing volunteers, particularly with the Sydenham Field Naturalists and Lambton Wildlife, who've been receive fields, and that has involved various things. But one of the things that we've been doing is the volunteers have actually been collecting seed from the appropriate species to actually from the area to actually use in the restoration, and we've planted a large number of trees. That restoration work is ongoing. There's more work happening with another field this year. So it's a multi-year project, but we're seeing some great results in establishment of natural vegetation, native vegetation, and other wildlife that has actually benefited from that, such as salamanders. Next slide, please. And then just, this is a promo. We're going to be adding another 100 acres to the nature reserve in 2021. It's an amazing property. We're hosting a webinar this Tuesday all about the Sydenham River Nature Reserve. So lots of details. Mara Sukumar, who's our Nature Reserves Manager, and I will be presenting that. But we're particularly going to be featuring this new edition, which is absolutely spectacular, and we expect it to be as loaded, if that's the right term, with endangered species or species at risk as the existing reserve is. To date, the existing Sydenham Nature Reserve, now we've had records of 38 species at risk directly in or immediately surrounding the reserve. So an area of extraordinary biodiversity. Next slide, please. And also we had all of our nature reserves, our existing 26 nature reserves, evaluated to determine whether they were eligible to be counted towards the national protected areas targets and the international targets. And I'm delighted to say that all 26 of our nature reserves were evaluated, and they all count as protected areas. So they've been added to the National Protected Areas database. Next slide, please. And just on the nature reserve theme and people getting out in nature under difficult circumstances, we were very fortunate to be able to have a trip to Petrel Point in the sort of late summer, fall. It was September, and as you can see, we're all suitably masked up. But I think it was wonderful after so many months of lockdown to finally get out and finally see some of our members in person, looking a little different with all the masks, but it was a fabulous day. Next slide. And then as Nature's Watchdog, I think as you all know, we've been kept incredibly busy with all of the changes to environmental laws and policies that are designed to protect the environment and protect nature. Next slide, please. It has been an onslaught, and we have had, unfortunately, limited success in persuading our government to change its mind about some of the changes that they've tried to bring in. The whole Conservation Authorities Act changes that were under Bill 229, specifically Schedule 6, despite massive outpouring, and I think it was probably the biggest outpouring from Ontario Nature members and supporters of any issue, and certainly with other organizations, but the government stuck to its guns and did not remove or amend what it had included in the bill. So that really gutted the authority of conservation authorities to with respect to their powers around permitting for development, that kind of thing. So the whole aim part, or a big part of the aim, is to allow development to proceed unimpeded. Next slide, please. And also, of course, the Lower Duffins Creek provincially significant wetland. We, along with Environmental Defence, with our lawyers at EcoJustice, launched a lawsuit, a judicial review, challenging the government's issuing of a minister's zoning order, which means that it was slating this wetland for development. And our case was that the minister's zoning order was issued unlawfully. So we were proceeding with that, but then fortunately the proposed tenant for the property, this property which would have been developed into a massive warehouse complex, they pulled out, Amazon, and with everything that happened around that, the decision was that the developers weren't going to go ahead for the time being. So the ultimate fate of the wetland still sort of hangs in the balance, but and we're prepared to jump into action when needed. But right now things are sort of on a bit of a hiatus, but it was a huge fight. Next slide, please. And this slide, a local group did an amazing job. Environmental Action, Ajax Pickering, in organizing a protest to march to Peter Bethlenfalvy, the MPP's office. And then you can see Mike Schreiner, who's the leader of the Green Party. He was there, as was the NDP member from the Oshawa area. And I'm happy to say that I joined, and a number of our board members were there too. Next slide, please. And then with the Greenbelt, I've showed this slide last year, and the story is still the same. We're still holding the line in the Greenbelt. The government has reiterated on a number of occasions that it does not intend to push any development in the Greenbelt. So thanks to what happened with Bill 66 and other issues, it does mean, I think, that the government has heard that the Greenbelt should not be touched, and we just need to stay ever vigilant and hope that the government continues to keep development or proposals for development or deregulation out of the Greenbelt. So a lot of our work as Nature's Watchdog is tied into our incredible advocates for nature. These are the individuals who have signed on as advocates for nature and add their names to letters, submit letters, either through action alerts on our website, sometimes as individuals and also as organizations. And this past year, we signed up almost 18,000 advocates for nature. So this means that a lot of you are pretty upset and mad at the things that our government has been doing. It is disheartening when we don't achieve the results that we hope for, but it's imperative that we keep pushing and we keep letting know our local MPPs as individuals and as local groups know that many, if not all, of these proposals are completely unacceptable. So what I do want is keep up the good work. We don't always win, but we can win, as we did with Bill 66. Next slide, please. And then our nature network, we welcomed 3 new member groups. And so by the end of our fiscal year, we were at 157 member groups. I heard from Lisa, our nature network coordinator, we're now at 159. 4 of those groups are nature reserve stewards, and 34 sponsored a youth summit attendee. So incredible, and a very large number involved with advocacy efforts, signing their names onto letters and submissions and that sort of thing. So an amazing group of organizations and an amazing group of individuals. And I'm going to finish off, excuse me, with our Nature Guardians program. Next slide, please. It was a tough year for our Nature Guardians program because so much of that program means meeting in person, and whether it's at our youth summit or, excuse me, leadership retreats, and just meeting to strategize and campaign. This photograph was taken from our Youth Circle for Mother Earth leadership retreat, which was held early last year before the lockdown. You can tell it was still winter, so it was actually in February, I believe. So we haven't been able to do anything in person since then. Next slide. But we did host the first ever virtual youth summit, and it was the Youth Summit for Mother Earth. And this is part of our Youth Circle for Mother Earth initiative that we launched last year in partnership with our Indigenous partners. Some of the things with the virtual summit, it was held over several weekends in August and September, and it was an amazing success. So everybody adapted well to the circumstance and made the best of things. And these are some of the things that they did workshops in virtually. And they also did other activities like a scavenger hunt, a virtual scavenger hunt, that sort of thing. It certainly doesn't replace being able to meet in person, but I think you know, our Ontario Nature organizers, Christine and company, and our partners and our wonderful presenters did a great job, and the participants did a great job, and really, I think, enjoyed it. Next slide, please. So we had participants from 103, we had 103 participants from 53 communities, 11 workshops, virtual workshops, and 100% of those who participated were very satisfied with the virtual summit. So that is really good news. Next slide, please. These are just some slides from the Youth Summit. And so finally, I would just like to thank all of you, our amazing members, for being with us as you are through thick and thin and through a challenging year, but a really successful year where I think we were able to achieve a great deal, but we couldn't have been able to do any of it without you. So thank you. Oh, and now I've put my video on again, so Lyle can tell me to turn it off if it's a problem, but
oh, it's good.
Okay, I'll just wait for my instructions. So it's now my pleasure to introduce the Ontario Nature staff. I do this every year, and we have some faces that are incredibly familiar, and we also have some new faces to introduce you to. So this is our conservation and education team. We have Julie Bowen, who's our boreal program manager. Oh, I forgot to take, Mirabai actually left us. I forgot to take her off. Sorry, but we were joined by Helena Mauti, who has just joined us recently as our Protected Places intern, and Christine Ombre, who's our education coordinator, who's the wonderful woman who organizes all of the youth summits and other youth events, Youth Circle from Other Earth events. Anne Bell, who I think you all know, who's our Conservation and Education Director, and Jackie Ho, who's our Protected Places Coordinator. And the Conservation and Education team goes on. We have Emma Horrigan, our Conservation Projects Manager, Gabby Zagorski, who's our Nature Reserves Coordinator, who you've met today, Brittany Vizina, who's our Citizen Science Coordinator, Zira McFarlane, who's our GIS Analyst, Smira Sukumar, who's our Nature Reserves Manager, and two people who've joined us recently, Kiva Fitzpatrick, our Nature Reserves Intern, and Alice Dombrowski, our Conservation Projects Intern. Next, please. Our Communications and Outreach team, we have Barbara Kenzie Winia, who's a Nature Network Coordinator. We have Lisa Richardson, Nature Network and Communications Coordinator. Noah Cole, who's our Communications Technician. Vince Noguera, who's our Communications Intern, who joined us recently. Melina Damien, who's our Communications Coordinator. Irene Milani, who's our Database Coordinator. Maya Davidson, who also joined us recently. You see, we've got quite a few new faces. Maya Davidson, who's our Communications Intern, and John Hassel, who's our Communications and Outreach Director and Zoom Maestro. Next, please. Our Development and Member Relations team, Kirsten Dahl, who's our Development Director. Kate Douglas is our Annual Fund Manager. Danielle Duchin is our Major Gifts Coordinator. Kiran Singh Chaudhry is our Gifts Administration and Membership Coordinator. And Kayla Saliv is our Grants and Donor Stewardship Coordinator. Kayla also just joined us recently. Next. Oops. And then finally, last but certainly not least, the team who make sure that everything is running as it ought to be and look after all of the finances and administration. We couldn't do what we do without their incredible support. So we have AJ Pilabello, who's our Finance and Admin Director, Sarah Hedges, who's our Managing Director, Jennifer Ho, who's our Administrative Assistant, and Lisa Martell is our Executive Assistant. And Lisa just joined us 3 weeks ago. So yeah, that's the Ontario Nature team who works on your behalf.
Well, now I can say thank you very much, Caroline, for a tremendous presentation. And I'd just like to add how remarkable it is what the organization you've built and the people behind you, what we've achieved. It's wonderful to see how Ontario Nature is defending natural habitat and wildlife in Ontario, and the tremendous advances that you've made in our nature reserves. I think we were all grateful for the strength of your organization and how you're moving it forward. And despite what we're facing with the current government, we're making headway. So thank you very much for that. Our next item on the agenda is the Treasurer's Report. So I'm going to turn the tiller over to Kurt Carlson to take us through the financials of the organization.
Oh. Thank you, President Lau. Fellow members, it is my pleasure to give you a short presentation on the financial highlights of the fiscal 2021 year that just passed. The audited financial statements were included in the package. You should have received them. And there are 2 motions to consider at the end of this presentation. Please note that for those who are observing, life wasn't hard enough for AJ and his team with COVID and all the related restrictions around accounting, but the auditors that were appointed by the AGM in November, Deloitte, decided to sell the client list to another auditor, MNP. So you'll see that the statements are in fact signed by MNP and not Deloitte as in the past, and that's why that's occurred. I have to say that the experience with MNP was good. but again, it created a lot more work for AJ and his team, because obviously you have a new auditor. They're going to look harder at the books because they're trying to familiarize themselves, created more work for AJ, and provided more they have to investigate. I'm pleased to report, though, that the auditors had no points of concern raised around the finances of Ontario Nature, and it was basically a clean audit. So a big thank you to AJ and his team for all the work they've done in getting this report and the financial statements to you. So on to the next slide, please, John. You'll see that there was $3.2 million in revenue. This includes $240,000 of unrealized investment gains. You might have to do a little bit of addition to find that on the financial statements, but that's 3.2 million overall revenues, 2.6 million in expenses. We planned a deficit of $141,000 for the year. The surplus ended up being $628,000 in actual surplus. The surplus is due to a COVID-related government assistance of $632,000, reduced expenses when the COVID restrictions were introduced. Caroline and her staff really clamped down on expenses to try to make sure, because we didn't know where we were going at that time with our finances, and so management did a lot of work to try to reduce expenses wherever possible, and also as a result of COVID restrictions. And there's an unrealized capital gains of about $240,000 in those numbers. So $123,000 in unrestricted bequest revenue. Last year's average, the last 5 years average is $332,000. There's also a $225,000 requested restricted bequest that we got that's not highlighted here. So next slide, please. So the balance sheet as of February 28, 2021, focusing on the left-hand column, which is 2021. Current assets are $1,801,000. That includes cash of $1.3 million, which is primarily related to the deferred grant contributions that I'll talk about in a second. Investments were $2,741,000. That's broken up in a couple of different ways. Here you'll see that the unrestricted is $1,257,000. Restricted is $1,484,000. That restricted, you'll see on the balance sheets, is the Nature Trust Nature Reserve Fund, which is used to generate income for the nature reserve stewardship. And then there's capital assets of $6,654,000. And that's comprised for our land and easements of $6,573,000. That's at 26 nature reserves and the 7,600 acres that Caroline was referring to. So here's a little bit of accounting concern, is that this $6,573,000 is simply the amounts that were paid for those lands. But like the commercial says, these lands are priceless in terms of the valuations that are and the uses to preserve habitat for wild spaces and for wild species and wild species. So these numbers simply represent the cost, not the value that they were going to make in terms of saving biodiversity in Ontario. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. Current liabilities is $1,521,000, deferred grant contributions of $1.4 million. So that's money that's been given to the organization, but we haven't done the work related to those revenues at this point. So that will become future revenues as we recognize, as we do the work and we recognize that revenue. So that gives us a fund balance of $9,675,000. That's comprised of the capital assets that you see above, $6,654,000, the nature reserves balance that we see of $1,483,000 or $484 at the top, and then the operating fund balance of 1,537,000. So you see a total of $11,196,000 in assets offset by liabilities and reserves. Next slide, please. So this is the breakdown of the $3.2 million in revenue. You'll see that starting sort of from right to left, I guess that's clockwise, 34% is for donations and memberships. 3.8% is in bequests. About 9.7 combined is in investment income and in gains on investment. The orange 23.4 is program grants. And then 20.9% is other income, which is primarily the $632,000 of COVID-related government assistance. Next slide, please. I think there's one missing. You've gone one too far, John. Breakdown of expenses. Thank you. Again, breakdown of expenses from right to left. Is clockwise. You'll see that conservation and education programs constitute 59% of our expenses. So that's a huge amount dedicated to the strategic goals of the organization. 8.7% is for our Ontario Nature magazine and other publications. 15.8% is for fundraising, which is well within the CRA guidelines. 9.3% is public relations and communications. And then administrative costs of 7.3%. That's lower than average, and that's, as I mentioned earlier, that's a result of management really clamping down on administrative expenses. For example, Caroline went without an executive assistant for basically the whole year in an effort to cut costs and make sure that the organization survives all the COVID restrictions, because we really didn't have the government assistance till late in the year. So management was really working hard to try to make sure that we kept our expenses very much in line with revenues. Next slide, please. Okay, I guess sorry. Okay. So the revenue 5-year history, you'll see that the revenues of $3.2 million in 2021 were 9% less than the fiscal 2020, primarily because there were no land acquisition projects, but it's well within sort of the average of the last 5 years. Next one, please, John. Expenses were of $2.6 million, were 12% lower than the $2.9 million in fiscal 2020, primarily due to project and other delays due to COVID-19 restrictions and no land acquisition expenses. We delayed projects, as I indicated about the deferred grant contributions, will be completed in fiscal year 2022, which is this fiscal year. Thank you, John. The next slide. So we will continue to safeguard our assets and manage our asset finances conservatively. Thank you for your outstanding support and working with us to protect Ontario's wild spaces and wild species and wild spaces. Again, just to echo Caroline's sentiments about the amazing membership and volunteer base, the amount of effort and financial contributions that were made were really appreciated by your board. And I would like to also again thank Caroline and the staff, particularly AJ, for all the support that's provided to myself as a treasurer and to the board. Next slide, please, John. So the two motions that we have, again, just to reiterate the process, the motion will be read out. Then it asks for us mover and a seconder, and then we'll ask for any questions and try to make sure we answer those, and then we will call the vote. So the first motion is that the audited financial statements for the year ended February 28th, 2021 be approved as presented. So if I can get a mover and a seconder in the chat box, please.
So moved by Neil Gray.
The seconder, please.
Seconded by Graham McDonald.
Okay, so are there any questions or comments on the financial statements themselves? Please put those into the question Q&A box if you have any.
So let's give a few more seconds. Nothing's come in just as of yet.
There's one there. Okay, John, can you read the one in the Q&A?
Oh, sorry. That's actually about the quiz, so not about this.
Okay, sorry, I just saw it pop up. So
Yeah.
okay, great. So hearing none, then basically I'll call the vote for through the poll feature, please. If you would vote in favor, opposed, or abstain. So John, how are we doing?
So most of the votes are in. I just want to make sure everybody gets a real chance. So
Sure.
it's
Okay.
been about 30 seconds. So let's give 20 more seconds.
Sure, absolutely. You monitor that, please.
Thanks. Okay, I'll say 10 more seconds. Okay, so the results are in. 98% in favor and 2% abstain.
Great. Thank you very much. So John, we close that one and go to the next one. Second motion that the accounting firm MNP LLP be appointed as auditors of Ontario Nature for the year ending February 28th, 2022. So if I can get a mover and a seconder for that motion, please.
Okay, so it's moved by Dorothy McEwen and seconded by Marilyn Baxter.
Okay, thank you. So any questions or comments? Okay, hearing none, then call the vote, please, through the poll feature.
Just while we're waiting for the votes to come in, one member asked a protocol query if a member can make a motion during the AGM, which I believe is a no, unfortunately.
I suspect Caroline might be in the best position to answer that, with most experience, or Otto.
Okay, I'll give them.
Let's finish this off and then we can ask that question.
Perfect. So five more seconds. Okay, so 97% in favor and 3% abstained.
Okay, great. So thank you. Then the motion is carried. You can close that then. So thank you very much again. And so back to you, President Lyle.
Thank you very much, Kurt. It is gratifying to see an organization as financially healthy and well managed as the financials and the auditor's report demonstrate. So thank you for that. We will now take a short break so we can all go and spend a penny. I'll ask you to you to keep it to just 5 minutes and return here for the start of the next segment, the next item at 11:08.
Lyle, just before you sign off, there was a question about making a motion that I think we probably should address.
Yeah, we'll get to that at the when we come back.
Fair enough. Thank you.
And while we're on break, I would just like to remind everybody that Ontario Nature Silent Auction is on right now. There are some fabulous items there to bid for, as long as nobody outbids me. And also, there are 2 opportunities to attend a webinar with Hap Wilson, which should be fascinating. So visit the link. You can see it in the chat, and help us bid up everything and get a good audience for Mr. Wilson for his events. And see you back here in 5 minutes. Thank you. Hello, everybody. We're just a little past 11:08, and I'm going to call the meeting back now. I'm sure any of those who've taken a little bit more time can pick up where we go from here. I just want to indicate in response to the question behind, we did confirm that we're not in a position to take motions, formal motions during the AGM, but certainly if people have wishes they wish to express, you can do so in the chat or write to Caroline directly. So thank you very much for that. And I will now ask Otto to take over the next part of the agenda and address the nominations and elections. Otto?
Thank you, Lyle. It's my pleasure to, as the chair of the Nominations and Election and Nominations and Governance Committee, to do the nominations for Board of Director this year. The members will be asked to confirm 4 officer directors, to elect 5 directors representing members at large, and to confirm 3 regional directors who have been elected by their respective regions as provided by the bylaws. The nominations of the following individuals have been received, and they have agreed to serve, and their election or confirmation is recommended at the annual general meeting today. The first motion that what I will do is I will make the motion, and then I would like someone to second or to move the motion and to second it. And then what we will do is wait for any questions after we have the nomination confirmed or the question confirmed, and then we will have the results. And please put the mover do it in the chat, please. Thank you. So the first motion will be that the membership confirm the officers and the executive presented by the Nominating and Governance Committee to the Board of Directors and elected on November 4th, 2020 for the 2021-22 term. Kara Gregory as President, Kurt Croson as Vice President, Dan Shire as Secretary Treasurer, and Lyle Clark as past President. So this will be the new executive. That's Kara Gregory as President, Kurt Croson as Vice President, Dan Shire as Secretary Treasurer, and Lyle Clark as past President. Dan Shire is moving up from a director, a regional director, to the Secretary Treasurer position. Could I have a seconder for the motion, please?
So moved by Celia Hart and seconded by Dorothy, well, let's say seconded by Diana Sherman.
Okay, thank you. Any questions, please put it in the chat. Or that's the question and answer, sorry. Q&A, if you have any questions.
Thanks, Otto. I'm just watching it now. I don't see anything just yet.
Okay, so if we could have the poll, please.
I can vote.
Yeah, thank you.
So it's been 25 seconds. Let's give it another 15.
Okay, we have 99% in favor of the motion that Kara Gregory, Kurt Croson, Dan Shire, and Lyle Clark are the executive officers for the next term. There was 1% abstaining. Thank you very much. Okay, so now the second motion is that the membership elect the following directors representing members at large for a third two-year term. There is a mistake on this if you're looking at the ballot that you received in the on the net. Dan Shire, of course, is not being elected to a third term because he is moving up to the Secretary Treasurer. So for this motion, it will be Brian Bordenstein and Doug Crocker are being elected for their third two-year term. Could I have a motion for that, please? Great.
So moved by Fraser Gibson.
Could I have a seconder as well, please, now?
And seconded by Owen Wiseman.
Thank you.
Just to note that there's also in the chat, we also have Dan Shire on there. So we'll correct that as well.
Okay. Any questions? Please put in the Q&A.
Give people a few more seconds. Don't see anything.
Okay, could we have the poll then, please?
And just a note again, Dan Shire's on the poll, but we've corrected that.
What?
Stick my hand behind her head.
So let's give another 15 seconds. Otto, can you just explain what a member at large means?
Okay. Typically, there are 18. I'm sorry. There are 16 directors for the board of directors, and 8 of those are chosen by the regions. They're not chosen by the nomination and governance committee. They are elected by the members of the regions. The directors at large are chosen from the membership and the community at large, and are directors at large, just like it says. They don't represent any region, and there are 8 of those, and they are elected by the members at large at the AGMs. So the nomination and governance committee choose those to be brought forward for nomination and then election. I hope that answers the question. So there's 16, 8, and 8. Oh. Okay, the ayes have it, 96% in favor, 1% opposed, and 2 abstained. Thank you very much. So that is moved or carried. The third motion is that the membership confirm the following directors representing member groups as elected at the spring 2021 regional meetings at this meeting. And that will be for the Great Lakes West is Marilyn Baxter, and for Huronia, it is Kate Harries. And for a second 2-year term will be Northern East is John Dybel, and Lake Ontario North, James Campstra. Could I have a person to move that motion, please?
So moved by Joan Daynard and seconded by Barbara Canton.
Any questions on that? Please put it in the Q&A. Oh.
Let's give a couple more seconds, but nothing yet. Doesn't look like any questions or discussion.
Okay, can we have the poll then, please? Mm.
Thanks, everyone. We'll give it 10 more seconds.
Okay, the votes are in. It is in favor, 99%, 1% abstain. Motion is carried. So Marilyn Baxter, Kate Harries, John Diebold, and James Camstar are regional directors, selected for regional directors for the next 2-year term. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure serving as the Nominations and Governance Chair. Thank you. Lyle?
Thank you very much, Otto. And with this nominations complete, I would like to take this opportunity to express very sincere appreciation for the 3 board members who are leaving us as of this AGM. That's Pete Kelly, Dorothy McCowan, and sadly, Otto Peter, a stalwart of our organization for so long. And unfortunately, we can't thank him in person, but I would like to provide an opportunity for each of the outgoing directors to say a few words, beginning with you, Pete.
Yeah, thanks, Lyle. Yeah, I just wanted to thank in particular Otto and Rick Cathray, who are real mentors to me when I first joined the board. And of course, all the Ontario board members, since I first was on the board. It's been just an extraordinary group of people that have come and gone on the board. And lastly, I just wanted to thank the Ontario Nature staff, everyone out there who's a member or supporter. This is the hardest working group of people you can possibly imagine. And Ontario Nature is in really good hands. And it's not just a job, it's a passion to them. So thank you to them. And it's been a real privilege to serve on the board.
Dorothy?
Yes, am I on? Can you hear me?
We can hear you.
Yes, I guess my audio isn't coming on. Oh, start video, okay. Hi. Yes, I just wanted to reiterate what Peter has said, and I also want to thank everybody in the member groups, because what I've learned, I was only new to nature groups when I volunteered to join the board. And so what I have learned from being part of the Nature Network and from being on the awards committee is what all the wonderful work our community science people are doing. So I want to thank you greatly for the work that you have done and will continue to do, I'm sure. And yes, I want to also thank the Ontario Nature staff for all the dedicated work they're doing behind the scenes, long hours, because I know I've emailed Ann Bell at 10 o'clock at night on a Saturday, and she actually answered. And of course, to my fellow board members for what I have learned from you as well. The Youth Council gives me great hope for the future. And my participation in the Protected Places conferences certainly has opened my eyes in the, I learned a lot from the personal stories of our Indigenous hosts, and actually what I'm planning to do and have started to make first inroads to is I'm going to be working locally on some of the truth and reconciliation issues that still need to be addressed. So thank you, everybody. And Caroline, I have been in awe of you, of your professionalism and your sense of your air of diplomacy and all of the difficult situations you've had to deal with, and Bell and the rest of the staff. I am in awe of your expertise and your hard work. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dorothy. And last but by no means least, Otto.
Thank you, Lyle. I appreciate that. I think Pete and Dorothy have stolen a lot of the thunder that I had, because I agree with everything they've said. It's been an amazing ride for me over the years. But personally, first of all, I'd like to thank all the members of Ontario Nature who are out there supporting our projects to protect wild spaces and wild species. Without your tenacity and hard work, it would be a lot more difficult to stop the degradation of our biodiversity. Thank you for everyone who does everything in the community science out there. I have learned, and personally, I've learned a lot from all of you, and it's just been a real neat thing to do. Next, I want to thank the staff of Ontario Nature, especially for their support and help over 11 years. I only wanted to do a good job as a regional director, but ended up doing a lot more than I ever imagined, and you have all helped me to do that. It's been amazing, with Caroline's support, and I can't think of a better person to run an organization like Ontario Nature than Caroline. She's been a real treat to have as the executive director during my stay here. And the rest of the staff is just great. And it's amazing how we've been able to get new staff people to take the places of people as they leave, because we are a proving ground for an awful lot of young people coming out of school, and they're learning on the job, and we've really helped them up. And they really, the staff is great, and that we couldn't function without all of them. They deserve an awful lot of praise. Last but not least are the OM board of the directors members. There's been a steady succession of very knowledgeable, competent, and dedicated board members who have made the last 11 years a joy to work with. Ontario Nature has grown a lot over these last few years, and I'm pleased I was able to be a part of that, really. I'm sad to leave the board, and I will miss all the staff and the board members, but I realize that Ontario Nature is in very good hands, and I wish everyone great success in the future. Thank you. Auf Wiedersehen, as we say in Austrian. Since you will be seeing me again at regional meetings, at outings, and at AGM. Thanks again. Bye.
Thank you very much, and well said, Otto. And now for me, my last act as this extraordinary privilege of being your president should make me sad, but it actually makes me overjoyed, because I have the extraordinary pleasure to introduce the incoming president of Ontario Nature, Cara Gregory.
Thanks so much, Lyle. It's my pleasure to introduce your new board of directors, who will be guiding and governing Ontario Nature on behalf of you, our members. It's been a while since we were able to meet in person, so we don't have a recent photo, unfortunately, of all current board members together to show you right now, but their photos will soon be displayed alongside their bios on the Ontario Nature website. So the officers on our board going forward is Vice President Kurt Croson, Past President Lyle Clark, Secretary Treasurer Dan Shire, and our regional club directors, Carolinian East, Ron Corkum, Great Lakes West, Marilyn Baxter, Ontario East, Denise Wilkins, Lake Ontario North, James Campstra, Northern East Region, John DeBolt, Huronia, Kate Harries, and we have positions that need filling for both the Carolinian West and Northern West regions. Our directors at large are Brian Bornstein, Joanne Brown, Doug Crocker, Leslie Lewis, Susan Robertson, Diana Shermett Wilson, Andre Willie, and we have one more director at large position that we're hoping to fill over the summertime. And so thanks for that introduction to me as president, Lyle. I've enjoyed working alongside you as vice president, and I look forward to working alongside you with you as past president. If you had told me 4 years ago, when I served in the position of Lake Ontario North Regional Director, that I would be here before you today, representing Ontario Nature as president of its board, I would not have believed you. I am so honored to be given this opportunity within such a phenomenal organization to work on behalf of its members, the heart of Ontario Nature, to protect wild species and spaces in our province. I'd like to start out by thanking my nominators and the board for their support and for giving me this opportunity. I have enjoyed working with and getting to know all of you and look forward to continuing to do so, eventually getting to meet our new members in person. A special shout out to Otto. Thanks for all of your mentorship, support, and friendship. I will miss having you on the board. Thanks to the amazing Ontario Nature staff for all of the hard work that you do, continually meeting and exceeding the targets set out in the strategic plan. And to our executive director, Caroline Schultz, the glue that holds all of this together, working tirelessly with both the staff and the board to ensure that things run smoothly. I look forward to working more closely with you, Caroline, and continuing to get to know all of the staff better. I appreciate all of your support as well. This past year has been a challenging one with the pandemic, as all of you know. Ontario Nature and their Nature Network clubs have had to be creative in ways in which they deliver opportunities to their members differently than they have in the past. Webinars in the place of in-person speakers, virtual hikes, backyard bird counts, or socially distanced small group gatherings or hikes. Kudos to all of you for the efforts that you have made to keep members engaged with nature during a time when people have needed nature most. This pandemic has opened our eyes to many inequalities in our communities, and there's been a huge movement within society to try and even out these inequalities, including within conservation organizations. Ontario Nature staff have reviewed its policies, procedures, and programs and has begun to implement changes to ensure that they are inclusive and diverse. I've recently had the privilege of starting a diversity and inclusion ad hoc committee whose aim is to review board policy and procedures to not only help to increase the diversity of our board, but of the membership as well, ensuring that it is more inclusive. They will be collaborating with staff to make sure that the staff board policies align. A number of board members will be completing their terms this year, at the end of this year. We would like to ensure that as positions on the board become available, that communication about these positions is more widely known to increase the diversity within our board to better reflect that of the province. It will be one of my goals as president to facilitate this diversification and inclusion process and help to guide its success. The current political climate provincially has not been one aligned with our mission of protecting wild species and spaces. It's kept Ontario Nature staff and many of our Nature Network groups very busy, devoting much of their time to communications with the government on a number of advocacy issues, such as the use of ministry zoning orders to bypass protections on wetlands so that they can be developed. I know that many of you have signed on to our action alerts either as an organization or an individual, and we thank you for your support. As your president, I will continue these efforts alongside board members and staff to protect what we love from being destroyed and will need your continued support as well. Outdoor environmental education being my career, I always look forward to hearing about the work and successes of our youth council. As president, I will continue to look for opportunities to help promote the great work of our youth council. Our youth are the future environmental leaders, and I feel it is our responsibility as adults to empower them to make positive change. Thanks everyone for your support. I won't let you down. So that brings us to the end of our meeting. Can I get a motion to adjourn? Oh, Otto Peter motions to adjourn. Thanks, Otto. for that motion. And thanks to you, our members, for attending Ontario Nature's 90th AGM. Due to the uncertainty of what the future holds in terms of the size of in-person gatherings allowed as a result of the pandemic, we're unable at this time to give you much detail on the date and location of our 91st annual meeting, but we will give you these details as soon as possible. I'm going to pass things over to Barbara Mackenzie-Winia, who will let us know who has won our door prizes and the quiz prize winners before our post-AGM Conservation Awards ceremony begins.
Hello, I'm happy to report that there were 5 lucky winners who have won our door prize today's meeting. They are William Home from London, Pat Baldwin from Port Perry, Rosemary Addison from Peterborough, Kaylin Wilson from Thunder Bay, and Peggy Patterson from Pembroke. The door prizes consist of a nature-related book and an Ontario Nature gift of membership. The selection of the 5 books range from the Big Book of Nature Adventures by Drew Monkhouse and Jacob Rodenberg, and Eating Wild in Eastern Canada, a guide for foraging by Jamie Simpson. William, Pat, Rosemary, Kaylin, and Peggy, look for these door prizes that will come in the mail to you in the next coming weeks. Secondly, I would like to congratulate all the folks that did well on the nature quiz. The nature quiz has become a staple of our annual gathering. And I think you will agree, Gabby put our knowledge to the test with this year's quiz on slippery salamanders, nuts about trees, opulent orchids, beautiful butterflies, and spring warblers. We put the winners' names in a hat, and we picked 5 random names. Your prize is a Ontario Nature gift of membership. Again, your prize will be sent in the mail to your home in the next coming weeks. The names for the 5 nature quiz winners are Jenna Quinn, Diana Sherbert, Fiona McKay, Sharon Lovett, and Donna Lewis. Finally, on behalf of Ontario Nature team, thank you for your continued support in protecting wild species and wild spaces we all love. Keep healthy, keep safe, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. Kara?
Thanks, Barbara. That's great. And congratulations to our winners. I'm looking forward to our virtual conservation awards ceremony. For this, I'm going to pass things over and introduce you to Ron Corkum, Chair of the Awards Committee.
Thank you, Kara. Every year at its annual gathering, Ontario Nature recognizes exceptional contributions to nature protection through its conservation awards. For the 2nd consecutive year, we are prevented from presenting the awards in person, but are glad to have the opportunity to make the presentation virtually. My name is Ron Corkum, an Ontario Nature board member, and I will act as co-narrator for the awards presentation, along with fellow and outgoing board member Pete Kelly. For this year, we have had an outstanding list of candidates nominated, which created a difficult challenge for the selection committee. For those award candidates who were unsuccessful this year, nominators are encouraged to try again for next year's awards. We hope you will join with us in celebrating these extraordinary individuals and groups. Award winners this year will be receiving as a gift framed photographs by the renowned nature photographer, Robert McCaw. Our executive director, Caroline Schultz, will lead off by making the first award presentation.
Thank you, Ron. So I am going to read the citation for the Ontario Nature Achievement Award. I asked very specially, very nicely, if I might do so, because the award is going to someone who has been an incredible colleague and a good friend for almost 30 years. I can't believe it's that long. The Ontario Nature Achievement Award is presented as an Ontario Nature member who has made an outstanding contribution to activities furthering the mission of Ontario Nature. This year's Ontario Nature Achievement Award is presented to John Lowndes, who was nominated by the Nature Conservancy of Canada. In 1991, John took on the position of Executive Director of Ontario Nature, which was then known as the Federation of Ontario Naturalists. And that's, in fact, when I first met John and worked closely with John when I was working with another organization. John has used his background in planning and environment acquired through education at the University of Waterloo and several positions with the Government of Ontario. John used his skills to raise the profile of Ontario Nature when he became executive director and was instrumental in restructuring the organization and enhancing its fundraising capacity. And I do remember those days well. And John, your legacy continues to this day at Ontario Nature. John helped steer a collaboration of environmental organizations participating in the Lands for Life process. So this was the initiative that resulted in huge gains in the number of protected areas in the province, and particularly, of course, in central and northern Ontario. John's time with Ontario Nature prepared him to take on the position of CEO with the Nature Conservancy of Canada, an organization I think that's familiar to everyone. And over the 23 years of his leadership with NCC, the organization experienced unprecedented growth. So what he did at Ontario Nature, he multiplied many, many, many times at NCC. And NCC established itself as Canada's leading private land trust. NCC, under John's leadership, has preserved and protected more than 14 million hectares of natural areas representative of Canada's biodiversity. An extraordinary achievement, and I don't think would have been possible without John's incredible leadership. John has recently retired as CEO of the Nature Conservancy of Canada, and that completes 3 decades of service to inspire Canadians to conserve and protect nature. John has retired, but I'm sure he is going to continue to contribute to nature protection in different ways going forward. Ontario Nature is thrilled to present the Ontario Nature Achievement Award to John Lowndes. Congratulations, John.
Our next award is going to be the W.E. Saunders Natural History Award. And the W.E. Saunders Natural History Award is given to a nominee who has achieved a significant goal related to an aspect of natural history or natural science research. This year's award winner is Owen Clarkin. Owen, who is currently Vice President of the Ottawa Field Naturalist Club and Chair of its Conservation Committee, was nominated by his club members. Owen is a talented field botanist with a particular specialty in woody plants. For over 5 years, he spearheaded an extensive survey of remnant habitat of red spruce, which is considered rare in Ontario. This involved using internet-based mapping tools to identify likely-looking trees and patches of potential habitat, followed by uncounted road surveys and then extensive field surveys. Owen has spent hundreds of weekend volunteer hours pursuing this project and has contributed many of his observations to iNaturalist. Last year, Owen applied for and received a research permit from Voyageur Provincial Park to perform a survey for a previously undocumented occurrence of red spruce. On completion of his fieldwork, Owen issued a report which documented locations of several red spruce populations, as well as rare rock elms and slippery elms. In recognition of his efforts to document and preserve vulnerable species, Ontario Nature is delighted to present the W.E. Saunders Natural History Award to Owen Clark.
Our next award, the Richards Education Award, is given to a nominee who succeeds in helping people understand the natural world to become enthusiastic supporters of conservation and environmental protection. The winner of the Richards Education Award is David Hawk, who was nominated by Nature Barrie. David Hawk has had a lifetime interest in nature and sharing that interest with others. Among his many contributions to nature education, David served a combined 16 years as interpretive naturalist at the Y Marsh Wildlife Interpretation Center, followed by Tiny Marsh Provincial Wildlife Area, where he gave on-site and in-school presentations through which he estimates interacting with more than 38,000 students. David has served as part-time instructor at Georgian College, focusing on the environment, and with Lakehead University, for which he taught tree identification and forest ecology to international students. After working as a wetland biologist with the Ontario Ministry of Natural Resources, David moved on to become Stewardship Program Manager and Ecologist at the Ginseng Conservation Land Trust. In this position, along with program management and landowner outreach, he has spent much time training volunteer stewards in habitat management. Through his involvement with naturalist clubs, David has been a speaker for over 240 presentations on a wide variety of nature topics and has acted as trip leader on many nature hikes and is an avid nature photographer. David has written a weekly nature column with local newspapers continuously for over 30 years, with more than 1,600 published columns sharing his nature knowledge with readers. For his outstanding contribution to nature education, Ontario Nature is very pleased to recognize David Hawk as the winner of the Richards Education Award.
Our next award is the WWH Gun Conservation Award. And the WWH Conservation Award is given to a nominee who has demonstrated outstanding personal service and a strong commitment to nature conservation over a number of years with exceptional results. This year's Gun Award is presented to Karen Yukich. Karen was nominated by High Park Nature. For over 3 decades, Karen has dedicated her volunteer time toward the restoration and conservation of High Park in Toronto. She was a founding member of the High Park Stewards, who work to protect and restore the natural areas of High Park. And for many years, Karen has chaired and co-chaired the High Park Natural Environment Committee. This committee is a community group which develops and supports initiatives to enhance natural areas in High Park and works with the city to mitigate the effects of high impact activities that take place in the park. Karen also edits and writes for the committee newsletter. On behalf of High Park Nature, Karen created and manages the website highparknature.org, which is a repository of information on the natural features of the park and the activities that take place there. Karen has not shied away from taking on an activist role and is a founding member of Protect Nature on TO, which stands up for the protection of wildlife and natural areas across Toronto. Karen has written submissions or made deputations to Toronto City Council on various issues related to enhancement and natural areas in the city. In recognition of her many contributions to urban nature, Ontario Nature is delighted to present the WWH Gun Conservation Award to Karen Yukich.
Our next award, the Ian Shenstone Fraser Memorial Award, is given to a nominee who has made a significant contribution to the maintenance, protection, preservation, or restoration of a UNESCO World Biosphere Reserve in Ontario. This year's award winners are Don and Marnie Ross. They were jointly nominated by the Leeds Grenville Stewardship Council and Emily Conger. Don and Marnie Ross have resided for many years in the Frontenac Arch region of Eastern Ontario. In the 1970s, Don worked for Parks Canada as chief naturalist, first at Point Pelee National Park and then at St. Lawrence Islands National Park, for which he successfully lobbied to be renamed as Thousand Islands National Park. Don was lead author of the nomination papers for establishment of the Frontenac Arch Biosphere Reserve, which was accepted as a UNESCO Biosphere Reserve in 2002. Don became Executive Director of the Frontenac Arch Biosphere Reserve and has served a leading role as it has worked with a network of organizations working to fulfill the mandate of the Biosphere Program. Don is a founding member of Thousand Islands Watershed Land Trust, where he currently serves as president. Arnie Ross is a board member and former president and secretary of the Thousand Islands Watershed Land Trust. Together, Don and Marnie have worked for the expansion of the Frontenac Arch Biosphere Reserve and coordinated local fundraising for significant property acquisitions within the Frontenac Arch, including part of Ontario Nature's Lost Bay Nature Reserve. The Rosses have worked to encourage land donations to the Thousand Islands Watershed Land Trust for conservation of natural habitat. Ontario Nature is delighted to award the Ian Shenstone Fraser Memorial Award to Don and Marnie Ross.
Our next award is the Carl Nunn Media and Conservation Award. And the Carl Nunn Media and Conservation Award is presented to a nominee that engages in effective communication on one or more conservation issues through the media. And this year, the award is presented to Leah Gerber, who was nominated by John DeBoer and Margaret Perret. Leah Gerber is a reporter for the Waterloo Region Record newspaper, who writes stories focusing on the Grand River watershed, often with an environmental connection. Her work at the intersection of ecology, social justice, and education draws on her past experience in other media. Examples of stories she has covered included a contaminated water aquifer in Elmira, gypsy moths in Waterloo Region, a prescribed burn at the Rare Charitable Research Reserve, and a pre-Confederation tree standing in Waterloo. Leah has also produced documentary videos on subjects such as recovering the Eastern Loggerhead Shrike for Wildlife Canada and the All Nations Grand River Water Walk for Alternatives Journal. It is notable that Leah was a finalist for this year's National Newspaper Awards in the category of e-reporting. Ontario Nature is happy to award the Carl Nunn Media and Conservation Award to Leah Gerber.
Our next award, the Lee Sims Municipal Award, is presented to a town, city, or municipality for implementing programs that protect the natural environment. This year, the award is presented to the City of Kingston, which was nominated by the Kingston Field Naturalists. The City of Kingston was the first municipality in Ontario to declare a climate emergency. Through initiatives like joining the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy and its work on crafting a climate leadership plan addressing adaptation and mitigation, Kingston is influencing and inspiring other municipalities to consider their own climate actions. Among the many initiatives the city has introduced are solar panel installations on various city-owned facilities, incentivization of construction of net zero buildings, maintaining a corporate fleet of electric vehicles, and enhancements to cycling and pedestrian infrastructure to encourage active transportation. The city has launched the Kingston Community Action Fund to raise money and awareness of projects led by nonprofits to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. Through a neighborhood tree planting program, the city has made a commitment to double its tree canopy. In recognition of implementation of numerous climate change mitigation measures and nature-based solutions, Ontario Nature is pleased to award the Lee Sims Municipal Award to the City of Kingston.
And our next award is the J.R. Diamond Public Service Award. The J.R. Diamond Public Service Award is given to a nominee that demonstrates exceptional public service resulting in a significant environmental achievement. And the winner of the award this year is Bruce McKenzie, who was nominated by the Hamilton Naturalists Club. Bruce McKenzie has had a lifelong interest in nature and has filled many roles relating to the natural environment. Bruce spent 39 years working for the Hamilton Conservation Authority, and after his retirement, Bruce was appointed to the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority Board of Directors and currently serves as Vice Chair. Bruce also serves on the Niagara Escarpment Commission. He is a former president of the Hamilton Naturalist Club and served as the director of their bird study group. Bruce is a founding member of the Niagara Peninsula Hawk Watch. He frequently leads outings, contributes to monthly periodicals, and speaks to groups throughout Niagara and Hamilton. And in 2019, Bruce received the significant honor of Grimsby Citizen of the Year. One of Bruce's most significant achievements was leading a 5-year effort to convert a decommissioned sewage lagoon to a natural wetland now known as the Grimsby Wetlands. Today, the wetland is a permanently protected 25-acre property with 2 large ponds, contains a 2-story wildlife viewing tower, which is connected to the town of Grimsby's waterfront trail. Numerous structures have been built under Bruce's leadership to provide habitat for birds and other animals and plants. In recognition of his many achievements for the natural environment, Ontario Nature is delighted to present the J.R. Diamond Public Service Award to Bruce Mackenzie.
Our next award, the Ontario Nature Corporate Award, is given to an organization that has demonstrated outstanding action in the environmental field. This year's award recipient is the Ontario Power Generation Site at Wesleyville. The nominators were the Willow Beach Field Naturalists and Northumberland Land Trust. The OPG Wesleyville site is located on the north shore of Lake Ontario, west of Port Hope. OPG has overseen an ambitious conservation program at Wesleyville that has received gold level certification by the Wildlife Habitat Council. The conservation projects include collaboration with adjacent landowners and community groups. A key element of the program has been restoration activities to improve habitat for brook trout on Wesleyville Creek. Other projects include monitoring and research at Wesleyville and Willow Beach coastal marshes, tree planting, and maintaining nesting boxes for bluebirds, tree swallows, and wood ducks, and osprey nesting platforms. Ontario Nature is pleased to present the Ontario Nature Corporate Award to Ontario Power Generation, Wesleyville.
Our next award is the Steve Hounsell Greenway Award. And the Steve Hounsell Greenway Award is given to a group or individual who has worked to preserve a natural heritage system core area or corridor. This year's award winner is Land Over Landings. In 1972, 18,600 acres of mostly farmland in North Pickering was expropriated by the federal government for an airport that was never built. For almost 50 years, Land Over Landings and its predecessor group have worked to oppose the establishment of an airport or other development which would destroy the rural features of this property. Their mission is to secure permanent preservation of the rich farmland and natural features of this land. Driven by the impetus of much advocacy work by Land Over Landings, over half of the federal lands were transferred to Rouge National Urban Park, completing a natural corridor from Lake Ontario to the Oak Ridges Moraine. Land Over Landings' current focus is on saving the remaining 9,000 acres in federal hands, and the organization communicates with all levels of government, works with the media, and engages the public through information meetings, special events, demonstrations, and workshops, and through newsletters and social media. Ontario Nature is very pleased to present the Steve Hounsell Greenway Award to Land Over Landings.
Our final award, the Margaret and Carl Nunn Memorial Camp Scholarship, is presented to a nominee between 7 and 14 years of age who shows interest in nature and has the potential to take a leadership role in nature programs. The winning nominee is awarded a sponsorship to attend the 4-day nature camp at Camp Kawartha, COVID situation permitting. This year, the award is presented to Sarah Inglis. She was nominated by the Willow Beach Field Naturalists. Sarah is a 14-year-old resident of Cobourg. She volunteers with the Willow Beach Field Naturalists, where she has helped with online Zoom meetings and participated in the Christmas bird count and the Rice Lake Plains bird count. Sarah likes observing birds and other wildlife while walking around the family farm. She enjoys riding her bike, gardening, canoeing, and camping. Sarah is an excellent swimmer, good at math, and likes to write about animals. Congratulations to Sarah Inglis on winning the Margaret and Carl Nunn Memorial Camp Scholarship. This completes the presentation of the 2020-2021 Ontario Nature Conservation Awards. We hope next year that the awards can be presented in person. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about the excellent award winners.
Thanks very much, Ron and Pete and Caroline, for presenting those. Congratulations to all of our winners. Thanks for the tremendous effort all of you put into nature conservation. Thanks again to all of you for attending, and thanks to all of those who participated in and helped make this AGM run smoothly. I look forward to working on your behalf and hopefully to seeing you in person at next year's AGM. Have a wonderful summer outdoors, safely enjoying nature. Thanks, everyone.